Hi, I'm Cameron Bedford, and this is my presentation on education and thinking, looking at two educational thinkers. So, the two educational thinkers I'm going to be looking at are A.S. Neill and Paulo Freire. I'm going to start with the brief history of the thinkers. Pardon me, moving along to the aims of education and the curriculum that they believe should have been in place within education. I'll then be talking about teaching and learning, as well as any support or opposition that came through their educational thought, and finally developing my own personal stance. So I'm going to start with A.S. Neill, or Alexander Sutherland Neill, who was born in 1883 and lived till 1973. He was also born in Scotland, where his father was a schoolmaster and his mother was also trained as a teacher. Already there was a big kind of history of education within his family. However, he didn't get along with school. He found it very difficult and subsequently entered employment at 14. He's actually quoted saying that he was the misfit in a tradition of academic success regarding obviously his family. He didn't have a very good relationship with his father, who he felt treated him quite harshly. However, his mother was very socially aspiring and almost over-concerned with respectability. A.S. Neill actually got along with his mother a great deal more than his father. He graduated with a journalism degree, but ultimately settled in teaching as a profession, and is famous for founding the Summerhill School in 1921. Moving on to Paulo Freire, he was born in 1921 and lived to 1997. He was born in Brazil into a very middle-class family with a lot of wealth. However, in 1929, the Great Depression occurred, leaving Freire and his family in a life of poverty and famish. Due to this, in 1933, his father died, leaving the family to fend for themselves, really, without any financial aid. And due to this poverty, he was massively impacted academically, ending up 4 years behind his peers. However, through this poverty and the negative life experiences that he had already had, he developed this great sense of empathy for the poor and less fortunate, which is understandable living through these same experiences. However, in 1943, his family's financial situation drastically improved, and he was able to go to law school, as well as studying philosophy, which is where a lot of his educational thought comes from. After university as well, he worked in education. So moving on to the educational aims of both thinkers, A.S. Neill believed that children were innately wise, and given freedom, they would develop in creative and very positive ways. He disagreed completely with the teaching of religious and moral education, stating that it causes fear and psychological damage to children. One thing he did believe in, however, was attendance being optional. So children could choose whether they showed up or didn't show up to school. And any school rules should be decided by this government of children, this democratic government of children, where they would decide any school rules as well as any punishments within the school and how the school should be run. One thing that both A.S. Neill and Paulo Freire believed in was that book learning and formal knowledge were less important than character development and self-determination. This is heavily emphasized throughout a lot of the texts. However, he believed that teachers should have a sound and solid understanding of child psychology, which he believed was essential to make good educators. Moving on to Paulo Freire, who also believed a lot of what A.S. Neill spoke about with regards to educational aims. He believed that education must give learners and pupils their own tools to create their own reality and knowledge, and that they must contrast knowledge from what they already possess. He believed that learning is a process, an active process that is presented, shaped, and developed through the understanding and discussion and reflection, and that it wasn't a passive thing of mundane knowledge being spoken to a student and them learning it. It's as simple as that. Teachers should know that students have their own life experiences and knowledge, which can shape their education differently. Every child is unique and has been through their own unique experiences. And that education should raise awareness so that students become subjects of the world and rather objects, so that they should become subjects rather than objects of the world. He had a very polarized view of education and the world in general. He seemed to categorize things into these two categories, for example, objects and subjects, or the oppressed and the oppressor. So with regards to the curriculum, A.S. Neill had a very loose curriculum, and as well as Paulo Freire. There wasn't really any structure to it. There was a loose structure, but there wasn't a sound structure to the curriculum. They both believed in literacy, English being a big part of school and should be accessible for all students, due to reading and writing being essential to the way of the world. A.S. Neill believed in maths being a bit more important than Paulo Freire, however, with a loose structure of these kind of core subjects. However, teachers had a timetable, but students did not. As I previously spoke about, students could choose when they came into lessons or not. With regards to Paulo Freire, he didn't really believe in this idea of banking education either, which is something that A.S. Neill also believed in. This is the idea of students being empty vessels and their education just feeding them knowledge, literally like a piggy bank. Completely disagree with that idea and that way of teaching. We can relate this to modern education and the modern education system. Standards of institutions rather than like back then, when they were educators, they have now changed, and they're now schools are inspected and changed if they do not meet certain requirements through things like Ofsted, which is a governing body. Within the UK's education system, the majority of schools now have been turned into academies. As you can see there, it's from 6% to 93% by January 2018. And that means that a governing body is attached to a trust which makes the decisions of how the schools run, including curriculum, teachers, students, that kind of thing. And furthermore, we can talk about this free-flowing agenda and curricula that was implemented in both Neill and Freire's philosophies, and how they just wouldn't be accepted nowadays. They would just be completely rejected. And as I previously stated, this would be due to things like Ofsted, which are government bodies which now regulate how successful a school is within Britain. This almost relates to the postmodern theory of education, which suggests that schools, through the things like trusts and the government, are now becoming businesses, and rather taken away from the actual teaching and learning that should happen within schools, and they're only caring about how much money they're bringing in from the students and how much money they're spending as well. So it's more of a financial aspect rather than an educational and academic aspect of the school. So with regards to teaching and learning, A.S. Neill believed that teachers must plan and deliver stimulating lessons to allow for a greater facility of education to students, and that students will find a hunger for knowledge eventually. Whether that be 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 weeks, they will find that hunger for knowledge and want to come into school to learn. He also believed that teachers and students should work together to create a democratic teaching environment. This is something that I did talk about with regards to the school rules being developed by both by the students, and that they both believe, Paulo Freire and A.S. Neill both believed that teachers and students were on this level playing field. We can see there that Paulo Freire talked about teachers and learners being equal no matter what qualification or age, and that pupils can help develop a teacher's professional development as well as teachers helping a student's academic development. So it was this kind of two-way part of knowledge on both parties that they work together very, very well. So support and opposition with regards to both educational thinkers. We can see here that Summerhill was deemed as a satisfactory school by Ofsted in 2007. Obviously the school has changed, not drastically, but has changed since Alexander Sutherland Neill was in charge of it. It's had to conform to a lot more of the societal standards of education that were different to back then. However, it does still reinforce the same values. However, we can see there that not all of Summerhill school children will achieve full marks or attend higher education or university. Now, this is a bit of a critique of Summerhill School. However, it kind of defeats the purpose of the school and the reason why it was built in the first place. Summerhill School promotes the ethos that being a happy janitor is more fortunate than being a dissatisfied lawyer, and is the principles of the school. It's what the school was founded on. Ofsted stated that the quality of teaching was good within the school, and that people's progress overall was satisfactory. This is including learning that takes place, outside of the school as well. There is critique for Summerhill as well, stating that it did not honour the society that students were growing up in, and this is because that society had rules and traditions, which traditionalists believed that all children should be moulded into both character and mind to a standard which society holds acceptable, which obviously contrasted the very nature of Summerhill. Many traditionalists also argued that students craved structure and objectives to learning, which could only really be reinforced through compulsory classrooms. However, support did come from progressive educators who thought that a Summerhill type of community in regular school settings could honour the best in all students to transform themselves. And that schools are for students and everything else is just a means to an end, to be used or not used depending on whether or not it will serve the growth of students. Now this is Summerhill to a T. It was up to the students and everything else was just a means to an end. Frere has almost oversimplified his view of reality. This is a critique in turn creating two categories of how he sees the world. I talked about this, his very polarized view of the world, stating that it's two subjects, as I said, dominator and dominated, or oppressor and oppressed. This polarized view of the world, it created this very skewed version of reality where reality isn't like that. Reality isn't black and white like that. It's very mixed. You can't pit things down to two categories because of how complex reality is. Okay, so my personal stance, I believe that schools and teachers should have a more flexible curriculum to accommodate the needs of individual children. While this may be expensive, I believe it offers a great depth of learning and understanding within children. In a sense, they can take control of their own learning and would be justified to excel in something they enjoy rather than literally learning content and sometimes not even learning the content just to get classified as smart or not smart through a grade on a piece of paper. I don't think that makes sense. I believe that teachers need to have an understanding of child psychology to teach. I think this just makes sense. If you know how children work or have at least some knowledge of that, then I believe that can make you a better educator. I believe attendance is important in the reinforcement of knowledge within the mind. However, I believe there should be some leeway in terms of how term times can be. Sometimes I believe they are too much, and maybe A.S. Neill's idea of or some basis of the attendance that A.S. Neill had implemented could be integrated within modern education systems to improve learning. A complete reform of the modern education system seems impossible. However, something does need to change, and due to our established modern way of education, It seems completely unfeasible that this could happen, but stress levels in children are on the rise, mental health is on the rise, and examinations are getting harder and increasingly have more weight attached to them in terms of how much they mean to the real world and how successful they will make you as an individual. Freya's idea of love and care, if implemented, I think, within the modern system, should have a massive impact on student well-being and student attitudes towards education, which is currently being ignored. Something needs to change, like I said, because there are issues that are being ignored, and some of the ideas that A.S. Neill and Paulo Freire bring to education seem to make sense to me. Thank you for listening to my presentation.